My mother-in-law and sister-in-law got furious at me, even though I was the one who took sole responsibility for my father-in-law's care. You were not part of this family. You don't get a seat at the funeral. You're a housekeeper, so work behind the scenes. And they continue with grins on their faces. Don't worry, we'll pretend we took care of Dad. That way, you don't have to worry about being accused for your shabby work as a caregiver. I can't believe it. What they said and did leave me speechless. My name is Alyssa. I'm 46 years old. I work part-time as a professional caregiver. My husband, Calvin, is an IT engineer. We have a son, but he left home when he got a job. We had just passed a minor milestone in raising our child, and now we were ready to take a breather. At that time, our family was shaken by a terrible event. My father-in-law had a stroke and needed nursing care. I can't take care of him. My legs and back are too weak, you know. My mother-in-law called my house to ask for help. My husband has a sister, Doris, who lives alone. If my mother-in-law can't take care of him, it should be either my sister-in-law or us. Soon after, we had a family meeting. We have a professional caregiver in the family, so it's a done deal, isn't it? My sister-in-law singled me out with a mean look on her face. I knew it would come to that. But that doesn't mean I feel comfortable discussing my job and taking care of my family members on the same level. On the other hand, there were things I felt from the perspective of a caregiver. In my work, I have seen many families crumble between debts of gratitude to their parents and the hardships of caring for them. My father-in-law and I are not related by blood. I thought I might be able to separate the two in a way that blood relatives can't. Calvin, how about you? How do you feel about your father? I asked my husband right then and there, and he answered immediately. I owe my father everything for raising me to be a man. That's when I came to terms with my feelings. Then I will take care of him. My mother-in-law and sister-in-law replied with big smiles on their faces. Oh, really? Thanks. I felt sadness and anger at the way they spoke to me, as if it was a matter of course. And so my life as caregiver began. Well, as is common in any home, things happen day by day. Bathing, toileting, and midnight bell. I quit my job because I found it too difficult to take care of my father-in-law while working part-time. However, if I took on all the work alone, I would become exhausted and collapse sooner or later. So, I left him to daycare for a certain amount of time and tried to keep my mental health in check. But my mother-in-law and sister-in-law complained about the way I was taking care of him. It was so lazy to leave the care of my family to others. Doesn't it hurt you to ask someone else to take care of your family? My mother-in-law and sister-in-law have forced me to be the sole caregiver. No, I will be crushed if I keep doing this alone. I try to argue with them. But they must think I can afford it since I quit my job. In the eyes of the world, leaving him to another caregiver, even just for a few hours, would be something shameful. You heartless bitch. Yeah, you'll go to hell if you treat your family like that. I couldn't take any more of their invective. How can you say such a thing after forcing me to do everything? I have a limp, remember? And I am busy with work, so I can't. Both my mother-in-law and sister-in-law kept repeating their reasons over and over again. They never take care of my father-in-law, who is their husband and father. They were always like this. So they wouldn't even pay for the extra cost that I asked for. And in the end, while I was taking care of my father-in-law, I never heard a word of thanks from either of them. But that didn't mean that all my hard work went unrewarded. Alyssa, thank you for watching my dad every day. I really appreciate that. My husband thanked me for everything. On his days off, he would take over the work for me. And sometimes he would even bring me my favorite sweets as a treat. These little rewards boosted my energy many times over. And so, my caregiving life continued for about 2 years. And the day came, as it always does. The day of farewell, of course, brings a lot of memories. Once he was gone, all the good things about my father-in-law came back to me, and I cried. On the other hand, I also felt relieved. What I can say out loud and what I can't say out loud are all coming together. It was with these mixed feelings that I attended the farewell ceremony. But what surprised me was the attitude of my mother-in-law and sister-in-law to the relatives who gathered there. They were talking about the last days of my father-in-law's life to everyone. Yeah, it was hard work. Take care of him at home, you know. But my husband was happy, even on his sickbed. They would talk things like that, as if they took care of my father-in-law. Thank you for taking care of him until the end. In response, the relatives thanked my mother-in-law and sister-in-law in such a way. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. At that moment, my mother-in-law walked toward me. It was a white marble floor, so the sound of her walking was very loud. My mother-in-law stopped in front of me and said, "What are you doing here?" "Wearing black." She almost grabbed me. "What? I'm here to say goodbye to him, of course." I tried to continue, but my mother-in-law shouted at me, "You don't get a seat at the funeral." And my sister-in-law, who came from behind my mother-in-law, continued, "Yeah, work behind the scenes, housekeeper. You are not supposed to be in the public eye, for God's sake." And she tried to push my shoulders. They both grinned at me and continued, "Don't worry. We'll pretend we took care of Dad. That way, you don't have to worry about being accused for your shabby work as a caregiver." What? I'm stunned by their words. "Because I'm too embarrassed to say that you left most of the work to the hired caregiver, right? So, don't worry. I'll pretend you weren't in charge of any of the work." They both burst into ugly laughter. I don't know what to do. I don't know anything anymore. I was almost shaking with despair and hopelessness. Then, my husband gently tapped me on the shoulder. "Don't worry, Alyssa. I'll take care of it." I turned and looked at him. I think I was crying without knowing. I could see him nodding his head over and over again. It came time for the funeral to begin. I kept my distance from my mother-in-law and stood beside the ushers at the entrance. The ceremony director greeted the guests. "The order of the ceremony will be changed a little." His voice echoed throughout the hall, and there was a slight murmur in the room. "The mourner's address, which was to be given at the end of the ceremony, will now be given at the beginning of the ceremony," he said, and handed the microphone to my husband. "Thank you for attending my father's funeral today." My husband began to introduce himself. "I am a son of the deceased, but I am not a chief mourner at this funeral." What? There was an uproar in the hall. You are not a mourner? Needless to say, the groans were filled with confusion. To my relatives, my husband is the eldest son, a true blood son. What is he saying? What is this? My husband continued, as if responding to their voice. My wife was told this by my mother and sister, that my wife is not family, that she doesn't have a seat at this funeral, and she must work in the back as a housekeeper. If my wife is going to be treated that way, I'm prepared to do the same. I will not have anything to do with this family right here and right now. My husband's voice echoed through the hall, causing my mother-in-law and sister-in-law to panic. Hey! What are you doing, Calvin? My husband threw a cold stare at his mother and said, Then, on what grounds did you say that my wife is not family? The tone was harsh, and the mic howled a little. He continued, How can you say you've been a great caregiver? You didn't even come once to check on Dad. What? It wasn't just my mother-in-law and sister-in-law. The whole place was abuzz with surprise. My wife took care of my father, alone. On top of that, my mother and sister didn't even help us financially. They just pushed their daughter-in-law to do the job. Here's the record. My husband took out his smartphone and revealed his father-in-law's caregiving notes that my husband and I had shared. The notes clearly showed how I took care of him. Alyssa did her best to change the flavor of the liquid diet each time so that the menu did not overlap. She also keeps a record of the numbers of times he defecates at night. She was concerned about my dad's constipation. My husband told everyone how I was taking care of him, reading out the notes. Now, no one believed that my mother-in-law and sister-in-law were taking care of my father-in-law. My husband took this opportunity to tell them the whole story. My wife was told by both of them that hiring another caregiver was just a way of skipping out on her responsibilities. But if she had to take care of my father all day long, she would collapse. So I made arrangements. But my mother and sister said she was slacking off and wouldn't even pay for the cost. My mother-in-law refused this explanation. Because my daughter-in-law is a professional caregiver, isn't she? And my husband immediately cut her off. You admit what I say is true, don't you? Well, that's... My husband continued. You didn't do anything to take care of him, so it's easy for you to come off like a fool. My wife is not a volunteer or anything. I'm going to charge you a wage based on the hours she put in to take care of him. I want full payment. What? My mother-in-law and sister-in-law flinched at my husband's words. I have a limp. I couldn't. I was busy working. There was a chill in the air in the hall. The only ones who didn't notice were the two of them. And my husband spoke to the family members in attendance. They are the one who have no right to attend my father's funeral. What do you think, everyone? After a short silence, a man stood up. If Alyssa is not family, then I am not family either. He was the oldest man in the room. My father-in-law's brother. Huh? My mother-in-law gasped. I don't want to be considered family, or even relatives, with the two. I'd like to be family with Alyssa, who did her best to take care of my brother. Then one of the women got up from her seat. I don't want them to think of me as a relative either. Now it's my father-in-law's niece. And one by one, relatives started to say they want to break the relationship with the two. My mother,
who is my father's wife, and my sister, who is my father's daughter, are now strangers. And my wife is my true family, not these two.
Our relatives in the audience answered my husband with applause. Thank you, Alyssa, for taking care of him till the end. It must have been very hard for you. The relatives who knew the truth now tried to comfort me.
Thank you, Alyssa. Thank you for everything.
I held my husband's hand back as he reached out to me, with tears streaming down on my face. My mother-in-law and sister-in-law sobbed as they left. And so, the farewell ceremony came to an end. Schumann's Stratmalai, my father-in-law's favorite music, was played in the hall. We also put his favorite wine bottle in the coffin. I hope you are at peace now. I know it has been a tough 2 years for you too. Thank you so much for raising such a kind husband. I bowed my head once more as I said goodbye to my father-in-law. I feel like I have grown as a caregiver since I saw my father-in-law off. I went back to work as a caregiver, from part-time to full-time, and was even promoted to manager. Every day, I listen to the complaints of new caregivers and the struggles of the families of those being cared for. On the other hand, my mother-in-law and sister-in-law, who were cut off from their relatives, moved far away because they couldn't stand the cold eyes of their neighbors. I probably won't see them again. My husband brought some flower seedlings to plant in the garden. Oh, bellflower? Your father used to love them. I looked up at the blue sky as I planted them. Thank you for watching till the end. Please subscribe to our channel if you like. See you in the next video.